What's new and exciting in New York Giants training camp this year? We're going to talk about that on today's LockedOn Giants podcast, coming at you next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and we are in the thick of Giants training camp. And this show, actually, I'm recording this show on Monday, August 1st. It's technically our Tuesday show, but wanted to get this out to you a little bit earlier to kind of get you up to date on what's going on over in East Rutherford. And also, I want to talk primarily about some of the biggest differences I've noticed in the way Coach Brian Daboll is running training camp as opposed to maybe years past with Joe Judge and before him, Pat Shurmur and Ben McAdoo. So all that is coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. All right, let's get the housekeeping stuff out of the way first before we get into the differences. Today was the first day the Giants were in pads, and the focus of the practice was primarily the running game, which I thought looked pretty good. The Giants ran a variety of runs during the practice. They had stretch runs. They ran up the gut. They did design quarterback rollouts and runs, just a variety of runs. And I just thought that the Giants were able to really get through, and the run blocking was really solid. So that was very encouraging to see, especially considering that the passing game is still a little, shall we say, a little, I don't want to say disorganized. Maybe that's not the right word, but the passing game's not where it needs to be. I know it's been only 5 days, but the passing game is just not crisp at all. There was a stretch during the practice where quarterback Daniel Jones threw 8 incompletions. Now, not all of them were a result of his doing. Some of them were miscommunications with the receivers. I know there looked to be 2 miscommunications with Kenny Golladay, but the passing game just not there yet. And, I take a little bit of solace in knowing that the running game looks like it's going to be okay. And I think, and I've said this before, I think it's going to be important for the running game to carry the offense in the very beginning of the year until that passing game comes together. The passing game is a little bit more complex, given that there are different routes and options that the receivers can choose. And they basically have to see things the same way that Daniel Jones sees it. And that hasn't always been the case. So I really believe the running game is going to carry the offense early on. I would not be surprised if we see more runs as opposed to passing attempts. That said, I also want to mention that I thought Matt Breida, on whom, by the way, I did a feature story over on Giants Country, a really, pretty cool story about Matt Breida's background, if you might want to check that out on Giants Country. I thought he ran well. Gary Brightwell had a couple of runs. He broke loose on an outside zone run. Daniel Jones actually had a couple nice runs off tackle. Saquon had a few nice runs, Joshua and Corbin. So just a lot to like about the running game so far. It's one day, I get it, but very encouraging to see that against the defense, because remember, they had pads on it, so they were able to, pretty much knock into each other and have live contact. So that was very encouraging. Now, the bad news, rookie safety Dane Belton, unfortunately, has a broken collarbone, which basically means the rest of his summer is over. And the Giants haven't come out and announced that yet, but clearly, everybody saw Dane Belton standing on the side with his left arm in a sling. And it was reported that first by ESPN, and I was able to confirm it later on, that it was a broken collarbone. And the gut feeling is that Belton is going to go on IR to start the season. The Giants will wait to put him on IR so that this way they can get him back. They're not going to put him on IR right away, but the Giants' safety depth kind of taking a little bit of a hit there. They also waived injured Jaron Williams, who is a converted cornerback to safety, and they signed Gerard Wilson, who is going to provide some veteran depth at that safety position. So kind of, a little bit of a hiccup, if you will. Also, while I'm talking about injuries and whatnot, John Feliciano still out of practice. The Giants say that he had heat-related hydration issues from, I guess, last Thursday, kind of, a long period for them to work on getting him back. But I guess they want him 100% before they put him back in there. But interestingly enough, Shane Lemieux has been taking snaps at center with the first team offense, and he's looked pretty good at it. I think out of all the guys who have taken first team reps at center in place of Feliciano, Lemieux's done the cleanest job as far as his snaps go. So if you remember a few shows ago, I said, gee, the Giants don't have a backup center on their roster beyond this year. You wonder if maybe, just maybe, is backup center or maybe is starting center in Shane Lemieux's future if he continues to do so well. That would open up, obviously, the left guard spot for Joshua Ezeudu, who has been getting reps at that spot. So that's something to watch as we go through the summer. Certainly a possibility because, based on what we saw from the veterans that they had on the roster, there were too many adventures with the snaps. But Shane Lemieux doing a fairly clean job of it and looking good. You know what? Since I'm on a roll here talking about today's practice, I'm going to continue. I got a few more observations I'll throw at you, and then we'll talk coming up in the next segment. We'll talk about how the practices are different under Brian Daboll and how they're better, actually. Kayvon Thibodeaux went up against Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal today, one-on-one drills. I would say he probably had a draw against Thomas and got the better of Evan Neal, his fellow rookie, in these drills. Now, to be fair, the defensive linemen and the edge rushers had the advantage because they were going ahead. The offensive linemen working on a slick field. It had rained last night, and it was also misty to start practice. So I saw a few offensive linemen get pushed back like they were on roller skates, probably because they were sledding on that wet field. So I can't say it was just, a clear-cut victory one way or another or a clear-cut loss, but very encouraged by Kayvon Thibodeaux's speed, his quickness, and his power. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, I'm going to talk about the major differences in Brian Daboll's training camp practices and why they're so good, why they're so important. So that's coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming your way here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, and they taste great. Built Bar offers 9 amazing flavors and nut and nut-free varieties, plus a rotating limited time offering of different flavors that changes up every so many weeks. Head on over to BuiltBar.com and use our special promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your first order. Again, that's code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. We're talking New York Giants training camp. Day 5 is in the books. Practice number 6 is coming up on Tuesday. I believe it's going to be a non-padded practice. At least that was the plan I heard when I left East Rutherford earlier today, but we'll see. I guess that's subject to change, but I believe the Giants are going to be in pads on Monday, Wednesday, and then Friday for the blue-white scrimmage. So that would be the plan. But all right, let's talk about the training camp practices. Now, I get this question a lot. How are the practices different under Brian Daboll versus, say, Joe Judge? And there's a few things that I'm seeing that I kind of like. The first thing, and this was revealed by Daboll today in his daily presser, is an approach in how they're working with the players. And by that, I mean, under the previous coaching staff, they just kind of, would evaluate players and pretty much say, okay, you know what, we think this guy can do X, Y, Z. Whereas maybe the player realistically only felt comfortable doing X and Y. What Daboll is doing that's different is he's going to players and he's saying, hey, we were thinking about asking you to do XYZ. How do you feel about it? And he's getting feedback from the players. And it's pretty much the same what he's doing with the plays that are going in the playbook. Going to Daniel Jones, for example. Hey, Daniel, we're going to run this type of play. Do you feel comfortable doing it? And they try it out. And if they don't feel comfortable, the players are encouraged to give the coaches feedback to say, hey, this isn't working for me. So that's kind of different. And that's important. Why is it important? Because last year there were instances, and I'm gonna point to one that I suspected was there was some tinkering going on that maybe shouldn't have been going on. Riley Dixon, as we all know, didn't have a very good year punting, but there were also times when you watched Riley Dixon and he was attempting to do punts that just weren't up his wheelhouse. And you wonder if the coaches just went to him and said, hey, Riley, we want you to do try these punts. These punts are going to help us and we think you can do them. As opposed to say, hey, Riley, let's try this out in practice and see how you feel. So there's a big difference, because when a coach comes to you and asks you, hey, I'm thinking about giving you more responsibility doing XYZ. What do you think? Again, there's that ownership, that joint ownership between the players and the coaches on the program, which is so important. Now, Daboll told a story that he asked Kadarius Toney if he would be willing to take on a new role within the offense. And Kadarius Toney said, sure, I'll try it out. And I just thought that was very noteworthy. I don't know that a lot of people, mentioned it in their training camp reports. I know I didn't on Giants Country, but I'm mentioning it here. But I thought it was significant because that's what it's all about. Coaches always sit there and say, oh, we want to put the players in the best possible position to succeed. Well, then they go and they ask the players to do stuff that doesn't put them in the best position to succeed. And the player struggles, and then they lose confidence. And then it just becomes a snowball effect, if you will, going downhill. So I thought that was very a key revelation from Brian Daboll as to how he's working with the players and how he's structuring some of these practices with, making adjustments along the way after talking to players about, doing different things that maybe can help the team. So that's the first big difference. The second thing I want to talk about is there hasn't been a lot of 7-on-7 practices or practice reps, I should say. Now in the springtime, we saw a lot of 7-on-7 drills. Basically, the 7-on-7 is the skill position players, basically everybody except for the offensive line. But the Giants, they did a lot of that in the spring, but they haven't done many 7-on-7 in the summertime. And Daboll was asked about that. Why haven't there been as much 7-on-7s? Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, Daboll's response is, I want to get as many people around the quarterback as possible. And think back for a moment, folks. What was a big problem with Daniel Jones last year? One of many. The fact that he had no feel for the pressure around him. So Daboll, in running more 11-on-11s or 1-on-1 or 2-on-1s where he's getting people around the quarterback, he's trying to build up Daniel Jones's feel for the pressure when the pocket collapses. Nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I mean, these are all weaknesses that, he spotted by looking at tape, and that he's trying to address early on in training camp. And it's only going to make, Daniel Jones hopefully better and more aware of the pressure when he is standing in the pocket. So I really like that one. All right. What's another thing that kind of jumped out at me? I'll give you one more. The way the practice is structured. So in the past, Joe Judge, for example, would have somewhere between 16 to 19 plus sessions. A practice is divided into sessions, and each session would be about maybe 2 to 3 minutes. Some of them would go 5 minutes. What Daboll is doing, more or less, is he's doing fewer sessions, but the sessions that he's running are longer. So you see sessions going 8, 9, 10 minutes, and there's not as many. There's like maybe, 12, 13 at the most. I think I've counted on any given day. And here's the other thing. The Giants are focusing on one area. And within that area, they're doing little breakout sessions. So for example, today on Monday was the running game. They were looking at, regular runs, first and second downs. All right. So the whole practice is structured around the drills that they feel that they need in order to be successful on first and second down runs. Whereas maybe in the past that you might see a practice that did a little bit in the red zone, maybe it did a little bit, short yardage, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They're able to focus and they are streamlining and condensing. And that allows the players to focus and not be jumbled and all over the place. So I really like the structure of the practices, the way Brian Daboll has been running them. All right, coming up next, some more thoughts about the Giants summer training camp after 5 practices. Stay with us. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. We are talking New York Giants training camp. We talked about some observations from Monday's padded practice, the first of many this summer. We just got done talking about some of the main differences in how Coach Daboll has structured training camp. And now just a few remaining thoughts that I want to throw out there, stuff that I want to get off my chest about what I've observed, what the players have had to say and that sort of thing. And I think if there's one thing that still kind of bothers me a little bit, all right, maybe a lot, maybe I'm being modest here, but if there's one thing that bothers me is that Daniel Jones and Kenny Golladay are still not on the same page. I mentioned in the first segment how there were some miscommunications or what appeared to be miscommunications. Daniel throwing a pass behind Kenny Golladay and then looking like Kenny Golladay ran the wrong route or took the wrong option and the ball, went in front of him. Look, the Giants have big money invested in Kenny Golladay. We all know that. But I find it a little disturbing that they just aren't on the same page. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, yeah, but Kenny Golladay was injured last year and he also missed the spring. But you know what, folks? Daniel and Golladay got together and they did some throwing before training camp, from what I understand. It's not quite the same, I think, as, running routes with everybody, with defenders around you and whatnot, but it's got to count for something. And it just, to me, that's such an important connection there because Kenny Golladay, you watch what the offense asks him to do. And it's not like they're asking him to do a lot of pre-snap motion. He's basically the deep threat guy, the big-bodied receiver who's going to run, try and separate, the guy you're going to look for to make the contested catches. He doesn't have the same role as a Wan'Dale Robinson or a Kadarius Toney. So really, Kenny Galladay's role isn't that complex. At least it doesn't look that complex. So why aren't they on the same page? After, 5 days. And again, that might sound like not enough time, but 5 days and you figure they're getting in any given period 8 reps. So 8 times 5, they've had about 40 or so reps, I think, if I had to take a guess. And not all of them, by the way, go to Golladay, the passing reps, but I would say there's been about, between 30 and 40 reps and whatnot. The point being is, when is it going to happen? You had it looked good before Kenny Golladay got injured last year. And then the bottom just kind of fell out. It fell out and they never got it back. And maybe I'm overestimating things here, but the Giants need for that connection to really start working. And I don't know necessarily if it's Golladay, if it's Jones, it's the combination of the two. But at this point, I would say that that's one of my biggest concerns about this offense. And that's why I said at the beginning of the program, I think the running game is probably going to have to carry the passing game early on. I think ultimately the Giants are going to be a pass-first offense. But early on, until that passing game really clicks, it's going to be the running game that's going to carry it. I would be stunned if that is not the case. So we'll see what the next few days brings. We'll see what the scrimmage brings. But I'll tell you what, otherwise, I like what I saw from the defense. The running game, I mentioned I like what I saw from them. Just it's coming along. They've got a long way to go, but you do see some progress, and you do see the team starting to come together the way I think the coaches envision it. And fingers crossed that they don't lose any more guys to injury and that they start to come together a little quicker in the coming days, because before we know it, August will be over. I know we just started it, but August will be over. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Be sure to keep it here all week long. We'll have updates for you, and we'll have special bonus shows as needed for the weekend practices. I think this weekend they're off Saturday, but they're practicing Sunday. So we'll just bring you as much content as we possibly can. And also, don't forget, check us out over on Giants Country. That's where I have all my written work. So be sure to check that out. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Appreciate you as always. And we'll catch you tomorrow.